Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to finish up today with a special selection, which is for one of you to tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's comes at us from Modin. Hi Bryan, I really enjoy your method of analysis and admire your musical memory and sharp ear. I wanted to throw this song at you for you to try to grapple with. Nero's Intention from Lie by Mistake. I thought about letting you dive in blind, but I've decided to be merciful, give you a heads up anyway. With a commitment to innovation and the musicianship to transcend established genre, Lie by Mistake creates a universe where fusion, experimental, and extreme music collide. Okay, that sounds like a lot. But, as always, I'm up for the challenge. So, let's dive into this and see what Lie by Mistake is bringing to the table.
Burned so many days and I still have my burned so many days and I still have so many days and I so many days and I still have my dreams. But it's passion and it's burning my out. Shine, now in my time with no soul, and it's setting light. Though you may not agree, you can't take your name. So cute, so
Oh, really neat how they kept that rhythm from the last section and just shifted the timbres around it, make it heavier. And we still got it. Okay, so the past few transitions have been sharp, but kind of work. I can't believe it's only been like 2.5 minutes. Okay. there's nothing off limits, and a lot of it is sonic variety more than anything else. You know what's interesting is despite all these sections, they've all been in 4/4. Okay, I can get behind this, which means they're going to take it away from me any minute now. Timing's a little rough in some of these places. I'm not sure if that's intentional or not, given how tight everything else is. Okay. Yeah, the drums going off too. I mean, that was a guitar solo, but it was also a drum solo. Whew. Talk about a song. Uh, well, first, I just kind of want to give a general description of what I heard because it was wild. It's mathcore. Particularly, I think because of the vocalist, reminds me of number 12, Looks Like You. But I mean, you can take any mathcore group and kind of works with this. But imagine that instead of strictly working with dissonance and tension and wild rhythmic patterns with an occasional flourish of some melody, we utilize that as a base and frequently dip our toes into the past. And I think it's really interesting because this is prog metal in a lot of ways. It's focused on texture and well, a specific texture and rhythmic ideas, anything that can be numerically represented for its experimentation, more so than prog rock, which tends to be more sonically experimental. So it's definitely prog metal in a lot of ways, but it always has one foot in the past, looking towards prog rock and several aspects of prog rock, whether that is, well, I should say several instances of rock's past. There are certainly some prog rock elements, especially leaning more towards into jazz fusion, but there's also a lot of hard rock elements in here as well, and it frequently finds itself uh, shifting out of that rhythmic, chaotic, noisy element for something a bit more constrained, controlled, and melodically focused. And a lot of these tend to come with guitar solos and or bass solos with very clean sounds and chilled out drum patterns to create almost a relaxing feel. In fact, even on the topic of relaxing, there are several moments when we shift over to, I don't know what the specific term is for it, but it reminds me of beaches. It almost sounds like we have not an electric guitar, but possibly something like a ukulele or something, with very laid back drumming. In fact, one time we even brought in bongos, um, and really gave that beach vibe. So it's very much a modern song with eyes and legs, still one step in the past. And it's not just any specific past either. And I think that's the fascinating part, is that it kind of goes all over the place. There is even one part when it made me laugh because it came out of nowhere. But we had a little bit of a classical nod, I think specifically towards Beethoven, but I can't place the exact homage. But yeah, so it's 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 just all over the place, to be honest, and in the most contrasting kind of ways. So it's probably best to take this one step at a time and look at each individual style and process how they go about crafting them. The one that is most prominent is the mathcore side, the heavier side. We have the screamed vocals. We have heavy guitar and bass that are frequently playing a single note or maybe just one to three notes. And really, it's more focused on rhythmic cadence and the texture of the notes being played, which typically have a bit of an abrasiveness to them, usually working with dissonance. And the drums are usually just as eclectic, working within the realms of these rigid, mathy rhythms rather than finding a groove to play within. And so these sections tend to come off as a bit chaotic because there isn't a groove to lean into. There's just a flurry of standalone rhythms. For instance, they might have a random snare hit against frequent bass kicks, and it might be two bass kicks and then a snare, and then three bass kicks and then a snare, and then one and then a snare, and then four and then a snare, and then four and then two snares. So it's just constantly keeping you on your toes as there is no loop. And well, there probably is a loop on a much larger scope, but from moment to moment, it doesn't feel like anything is cyclical or repeated. And there isn't a general groove to go along with it either. It's just the rhythm and the texture and some dude screaming over it. This is what many of these sections are based upon. What I found most interesting is when we get away from this style. Well, there are a couple heavier styles too, right? Because we also have a breakdown section, which everybody just plays a really low note. Was there a third one? It might have been it. Just the mathcore and then like the hardcore breakdown. Yeah, those are pretty synonymous throughout. And I think it's interesting that we did this specific style the most, but I would also say it was the least present. Primarily because while most of the other sections were split up into different styles, like to contrast against the heaviness, we have the soft, but there was like three or four different types of soft. So none of them had as much time throughout the song as the heavy style. But if you add them all up, I do think it was about 50-50, or maybe even leans a little bit more towards the softer styles. And so I think that helps because aside from any rhythmic complexity or rhythmic changes, every time that we come back to the heavy section, it's pretty much built the same way. And so a lot of the times we would come back to it and be like, okay, now we're doing this again. It's a brand new section. I haven't heard this idea before, but it's the same general concept. And that was pretty consistent. When we move over to the lighter side, though, there's a few different styles that we got from this. Some of them were more atmospherically focused, where we would have a chord progression and some light drumming in the background. Maybe the bass would be walking a bass line. I think a couple of times the bass was leading with the melody. Very chill and relaxed, though. We also had the hard rock style, which was usually a shredding guitarist with a walking bass line underneath and a pretty straightforward drum rhythm against that. And then, of course, we had the jazz fusion section, which was a bit jazzier. It brought in some new styles of chord progressions. And actually, that's another thing, is the chord progressions themselves, which we're going to have to talk about in a second. But once again, we had a soloing, usually a guitar solo, bass line, sometimes melodic, sometimes walking, and the drums were all over the place. Sometimes we got rock style drums, sometimes we got jazz style drums. It's kind of a grab bag. What really separates all three of these, besides the lack of a solo in our most chill variant of it, is the chords, the atmosphere. What does the section feel like? What kind of emotions are being injected here? And that's where the chords come in, and they, like I said, the chillest one tends to bring about images of relaxation, especially the beach. This would be like the bongo section. They did not do a conga in here at all. Um, which would have been weird, but would not have been unexpected. They really could have gone anywhere with this track. The rock section tends to have a bit more drive, utilizing heavy use of power chords and a little bit of bluesiness, whereas the jazz section tends to bring in a lot of that spicy swing style to it as far as the chord progressions go. And so all three of them have very different personalities, very different flavors to them. So whenever we move away from the heavy mathcore stuff, we generally know what we're getting into, but there's a variety of ideas that we could actually fall into, which creates a bit of a balance, I think, to the song, especially since returning to the mathcore situation, like I had mentioned, is a bit predictable. When things get heavy, we're typically going to do this rhythmic thing again. And so being able to know that we're going to flip back into something unknown, I think really helps the song keep itself interesting from moment to moment, more so than if they just had two ideas and they flipped the dial back and forth. Now, speaking of flipping a dial back and forth, the speed and regularity of moving between these two are just as random as some of the rhythmic patterns in the mathcore section. This was interesting, if exhausting frequently. Occasionally, we'll stick with an idea for long enough to understand what it is and maybe even see an evolution of it shifting or modifying itself into a new section within itself. But well, a lot of the time, it's also just jumping back and forth rapid fire. In fact, there was one moment where we were going back and forth between a heavy and a light style every 2 bars. It was interesting. I'm glad they only did it once. It was definitely something that was rather novel, but could have overstayed its welcome really quickly. But yeah, it's a song that keeps the listener on their toes because there's just no way of knowing what comes next and when it comes. And the two of those can make for an exceptionally fun listen or a stressful listen, as was my case. I think casually this would end up being a bit more of a fun listen, but as I'm trying to pick everything up, the speed and frequency that we move between ideas and not being able to anticipate what's coming next to align my attention, it made every jump tense because I get thrust into a new idea. I wasn't really done with the last, and now I've got to figure out what's going on here. And I don't know how long I have, so I'm jumping between all these ideas, trying to pick up as many details as I can in a short period of time because I might only have 4 bars to figure out, what's going on here, so I can so I can begin to pick up these threads of consistency between all the ideas so I can put an analysis together that ties this chaotic mess together. And I say mess in the best way, I think, because there's obviously an order to it all. It is messy, but it is not a mess. Um, if you've ever been in an artist's studio, I think you kind of get that. I'm sure there are some organized artists out there, but I've met quite a few artists, and all of them have really messy studios, but they know exactly where everything is. And I think that's the important thing with this track is that it's messy, but it's not disordered. And but if you're not used to it, you're walking into somebody else's workspace, or in this situation, I'm walking into somebody else's art. It feels very disorganized and jittery, and everything's out of place and nothing makes any sense to me. And that's part of the first time novelty of music like this is just not knowing what's going on. And like I said, I think that'd be more enjoyable on a casual listen of just enjoying the zaniness of it. But critically listening to it and knowing I've got to craft something afterwards to explain my interpretation of it and what they're doing. Yeah, this is a very anxious, anxiety driven listen. Um, there is one note that I want to make because it kind of threw me off here. The whole band shifts between these two styles except one musician. The vocalist retains their mathcore scream even in the lighter sections, and I'm not a big fan of it. I don't know if it's the texture to the scream itself. Maybe a growl would work better, maybe a metalcore scream, death scream. I don't know if it's the particular harsh style. I don't know if different music would be better. Maybe it's not specifically going from light to heavy or heavy to light, but this specific kind of light that's not meshing well. But something about utilizing those heavies in the softs here or sorry, the harshes in the soft, it never quite worked for me, and I was happier when the soft sections were instrumental. I kind of wish the vocalist, well, I don't want to assume here. I kind of wish they had done some cleans instead. I was going to say I wish that they had a vocalist who was more versatile, but I don't know if the vocalist can do cleans or not. So I don't want to make that assumption, but I do wish that some cleans were tossed in here just to balance things out a little bit. And see, another thing is that it would have a domino effect too, where we might have seen less shredding guitar work in the hard rock and jazz fusion sections if they had vocals there instead. They might have found that there was too much melodic information going on and removed the guitars down to chords, maybe, or maybe counterpoint in order to allow the vocals to have a little bit of room, which I don't know would be an across the board better idea, but I did find that the shredding guitar bits were nice on their own, but as frequently as they came, I wish we would have slowed down a little bit with some of the melodies and created some contrast. But this isn't my project. And it's obvious that they have a very specific idea in mind for their music that is very them. So, I just got to trust that they really enjoy what they did here, despite some of the aspects not personally working for me. Uh, there had to have been something else I wanted to hit on too before we moved on, but maybe not. Oh, I mean, just real quick before we move on is just general praise for the instrumentation, even the vocalist. This type of harsh is very full-bodied, very present. Um, And so that's really nice to work well against the really big sounds coming around it. But also, I want to, put some praise out there for the bassist, which sounded fantastic and had some really interesting lines as far as melodic and walking ideas. And then the drummer was just so many different styles to play within. They definitely nailed everything, whether it was smoother or heavier or rhythmically that's not a word, rhythmically complex. They rose to every occasion and fit well with whatever style they had going. And the same thing goes for the guitar, not just the performance of the guitar, which I thought was not quite as difficult in the diversity area as I think the drummer had to go through, but the guitarist also had to find a sound for each of these styles as well. So there's the extra production element of finding the guitar tone for the heavy section, for the beach section, for the jazz section, for the rock section, and really nailing it, right? Each of those, they sounded so uh, cliche for the style, really drilling home that they're aiming for a specific era and genre um, for those moments. So yeah, just a lot of hard work went into putting the song together, and ensuring that each of the sections feel the way that they should, compositionally and sonically. So that was really impressive, I think. Um, so yeah, lyrics. All right, so I had to resort to Sonic Hits for this one. The lyrics were not on any of the regular sites I go to. And at first, I thought that they were misheard lyrics, possibly done by ear with a lot of issues, but they appear to be correct. But I mean, listen to some of these lines. Come on, party, we're beautiful. One more taste, have to melt and frame. Hold on, Picasso. Uplift fusion with massive palms. There is a general element to this that feels very ambiguous in a way of purposefully removing key transitionary words in the sentence to create something that is a bit more abstract in meaning. If we look at abstract art, as taking what we see in front of us, but viewing it through a different lens and possibly removing some details or hyper accentuating other details. That's kind of what this feels like in poetic form. It's the words generally feel like they belong next to each other, but their order in the sentence feels off, and there's words missing that would help tie it all together and make it exceptionally clear and concise. Were it not for a general description of a meaning for this track, I don't know that I'd have much to say here. According to this meaning, though, the song is about uh, the difference between meaningless pleasure and pursuing one's passions. Apparently, the opening bit of dialogue is about uh, engaging in meaningless activities that might make you feel happy in the moment but will make you feel empty in the end. Whereas the rest of the song is about the dangers of pursuing a passion as an opposing idea to the pursuit of mindless pleasure. Um, there's the idea that the pursuit of one's passions can be overwhelming and dangerous and can consume one, but by the end of the track, the singer has determined that they might have burned a bit too bright too quickly, but that they couldn't see any other way of living their life. And I think it's an interesting track to put these two ideas of mindlessness versus complete attention and consumption of oneself as the only two ways to live without a medium. I can definitely see some people might feel this way, especially when it comes to being an artist. But there has to be a happy medium here. Despite that, I enjoy the ending of this track where it's stated that the singer has come to terms with this and is happy with the way that they've lived their life, even if it has caused whatever suffering or pain that it has. Art is that important, and as an artist, it can sometimes feel like if you don't get the art out of you, it is physically and emotionally painful. And so, in a way, for many artists, I think to continue to make art even at the detriment of your social life, or maybe even your mental health or physical health, even possibly, depending on what your art is, that it's better to get it out of you, with regardless of what that might entail, than to keep it within and just not do anything with it. And there's a different kind of pain to the emptiness of that. And so, if the song is about artistic expression and making the art that you want to make, regardless of how bright it burns, I think a song like this works very well in that it is exceptionally eclectic and artistic in a lot of ways, even if I don't quite understand all of the nuance of it. It's definitely something that stands out and to me is very Lie by Mistake. This is the first track I've heard from them, but if it's indicative of their style, there's no one else like them, or at least I haven't heard anyone else like them. And for them to say, you know what, let's do it. Let's make our music the way that we want to make it, and let's get wrapped up in this. And let's, put everything we have into. And this is the only album they have as well, from what I can tell. It ends up being a very powerful message, I think, of the power of art and what it can accomplish and who you can be through your art. Even if, like I said, I don't necessarily agree with the duality here, I still find it quite interesting. Those are my thoughts on Lie by Mistake. it's called Nero's Intention too. See, Nero was a Roman. Uh, Dang, why am I blanking out? A ruler. Um, and it was during times of religious strife. I think there was division between the Christian Romans and the original Romans, the ones who believed in the Roman gods, Neptune and um, Pluto and all those. And something happened. I don't remember, but there's a huge fire, and Rome was set ablaze, and Nero was off uh, vacation or something. I don't know. He wasn't a real great ruler. I remember that, and he let Rome burn. I don't remember if he could specifically see the fire from where he was staying, or if he just heard word of it. But it was just his idea was let Rome burn. I'll be back when I be back. And if I remember correctly, when he came back too, he had no sympathy for what happened. And his first thought was, well, now that this building's burned to the ground, I have a place for my garden or whatever he wanted to build for himself. And yeah, so Nero's intentions, did he stoke the flames of hatred, which would have led to the arson? Is that why he sat back? I don't know enough about Greek history to know, or sorry, Roman history, to know what his intentions were, or if any historians have had any definitive look into what his intentions might have been, maybe through letters that were written or something. I don't know. But I'm trying to tie that back to the music, and I don't know. From the perspective of the people who ruled over, everything about his decisions were poor. None of it made any sense to them. It was all self serving, which the music is about. Lyrically, it's about serving the self. Regardless of what the consequences are, do what you got to do to get your music out. Ah, man, I feel like I'm grasping at straws there, but there is a little bit of a parallel between those two. I don't know if that's strong enough to necessarily name the song after it. I might be missing something, but it's the beginning of a theory, I think. Anyways, for realsies now, those are my thoughts on Lie by Mistakes, Nero's Intention. What did y'all think of this track? Was there anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said, or correct me on, or give me your own perspective on? Let me know down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you can find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow. We're going to continue on with this unusual post rock music, and we'll check out another special selection. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.